Great, thank you again to those who just joined. We'll give everyone just another minute to log on, and then we will get started. And just testing, Molly, can you see that first slide?
Yes, I can.
Perfect, thank you. Okay. Okay, well, you know what? We have a few introductory slides to let everyone know about the session. So let's actually start going through those, and we can let other attendees join in the next few minutes. So welcome everyone. My name is Danielle Azaridi. I am a genetic counselor and project manager for the Clinical Genome Resource, or ClinGen. And we are bringing to you today the fifth clinical genomics career panel that we've been putting on this summer. So I will point everyone's attention to our schedule. So like I said, this is our fifth and final career panel. We did have 4 previous ones focusing on different aspects of clinical genomics. You can access all of those recordings from those panels on our website, and you'll also be able to look at the recording from today that will be made available later this week. So feel free to share those with others you know who may be interested in some of the information shared on here today. And then for all of us who have been using Zoom over the last year, you probably know this quite well, but we thank everyone who asked questions during the registration process, and we encourage you to continue asking questions throughout the panel as our guests begin talking about their journeys to a career in clinical genomics. So there is a Q&A box. You'll be muted, so we ask that all questions be typed in the Q&A, and we'll keep track of those over the course of the session. So you can also upvote if you see someone has asked a question that's relevant to something you've been thinking about, and push it up the list of questions to ask. So feel free to take advantage of that feature. And with that, we're actually going to ask a few questions of our attendees. So it looks like we have a good group here. We just like to get to know a little bit more about you so our guests can focus on your backgrounds and where you're coming from as they speak with you. So we're going to pull up a poll question. It should appear on your screen. And attendees, we would like to know, as of fall 2021, are you a student? And then we've listed a number of types of schooling there that you may be part of. Okay, so let's see those results. It looks like we mainly have undergraduate students represented on the call, so our panelists can keep that in mind. But we do also have others who are not currently a student or are recent graduates exploring next opportunities. So we are glad that you are all here. And we'll focus on one more question, and then we'll get started with our panel. So please let us know if you are considering what we're calling a stepping stone opportunity. Are you considering a stepping stone opportunity? So yes, unsure, or no. And there are no right or wrong answers. Yeah, so the majority of you are, and others unsure or no. So that's all very helpful to know as we get into our session. So thank you for participating. And with that, I'll just briefly introduce the idea of a stepping stone, what we're referring to in today's panel. So we've had, for the past few weeks, multiple different clinical genomics careers presented. So people who are in those careers now and can speak about how they find that career. But today, what we're focusing on are 5 young professionals in different stages of a career in clinical genetics. And we'll be speaking with them about the opportunity they are either currently in or they've had along the way to help define their career path and how they've got to where they are today. So we'll be asking about the experience that they learned in those roles, experience that they needed to get into those roles, and hopefully inform some of the next steps in our attendees' career paths. So some of these jobs include genetic counseling assistants and biocurators, several others, which you'll hear about momentarily. So next, I am going to stop showing the slides, and what I will do is turn everything over to our panelists. I'll be asking you to introduce yourself one by one in the order that you all appear here. So our panelists are just going to take a few moments to tell you about what they are doing now and some of the experience that led them there, and then we can begin our questions and answers. So with that, I'll stop sharing and I will ask Leanna to first introduce herself.
Thank you, Danielle, and also thank you for having me today. I've actually had a few stepping stone opportunities, so I'm really looking forward to going through those and then taking any questions about those. So my name is Leanna. I'm currently working as a genetic counseling assistant at Geisinger. With that, my role is 80% research. That's work with ClinGen, Clinical Genome Resource, specifically variant curation expert panels. Along with that, I also help with patient registries like Genome Connect. And then beyond that, I also have 20% of my time in the clinic with the Autism and Developmental Medicine Institute. Before that, I actually worked as a research associate in a clinical laboratory, and we worked to stratify patient risk to progression to esophageal cancer. So that was more of a wet lab position, clinical testing, startup biotech role. So I would be happy to speak about that as well. And then before that, just out of undergrad, I stayed on for a little bit to do some academic research in a lab that was studying malaria. So I got to do some PCR, some Sanger sequencing, and then also a little bit of animal work and start with CRISPR. So again, happy to speak about any opportunities that I've had. So just let me know what interests you. Oh, and I forgot to speak about my school. I'm planning to apply to genetic counseling programs for fall of next year.
Excellent, thank you. And Hannah, you're up next.
Great, thanks Danielle, and thanks everyone for being here and for including me. So my name is Hannah McCurry, and I work as a staff biocurator for ClinGen, as Leanna mentioned, the clinical genome resource. And I'm at the Broad Institute, so my job involves determining the clinical significance of genes and the pathogenicity of variants based on information collected from the literature, from genetic databases or internal sources of data, in tandem with collaborating closely with my team at the Broad and with experts in the field across different disease areas. So I've been in this role for a year, and before that, I graduated from Trinity College in Hartford in 2020. I like to say graduated. And in the future, I am planning on pursuing my PhD to actually move towards working in the wet lab research in the future. So applying for that for next fall.
Excellent, thank you, Hannah. And moving on to Natalie.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see some of the old ClinGen folks that I worked with. So my name's Natalie Pino. I'm an incoming first-year medical student at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. My stepping stone opportunity was after undergraduate. I went to work as a scientific program analyst at the NIH's National Human Genome Research Institute, and I got to work on a program manager with the ClinGen program, in addition to a few other programs funded by the NHGRI. So things like the Ethical, Legal, and Social Implications Research Program, the Phoenix Toolkit, and it, just broader things related to the Institute. So things like working on the strategic planning for their 2020 vision. The role was mostly administrative, but I got to see a lot of things related to genomics broadly and also medicine in general. And my goal right now is just to get through medical school and hopefully incorporate some of the things that I learned during my gap years. So things like genetic research and hopefully ethics. I'm excited to be here, so let me know if you have any questions.
Excellent, thank you. And Bryce, please introduce yourself.
Yes, and thanks, Danielle, for very much for having me, and I'm happy to be here to discuss my stepping stone opportunities. So I actually had a few different opportunities that I was involved in. I originally got my bachelor's of science from Clemson University in South Carolina before moving on to getting my PhD in molecular and human genetics at Baylor College of Medicine. And from there, I moved on to a short postdoctoral research fellowship where I did research in a cancer biology lab at UNC Chapel Hill in Chapel Hill, North Carolina for about a year. And then from there, I moved into the laboratory of Dr. Jonathan Berg at UNC, where I did kind of flipped my research interests from the wet lab specifically to dry work, where I was doing computational work with Jonathan, focused on understanding the pathogenicity of variants in individuals that have heart disease, as well as cancer susceptibility. And also I did quite a bit of biocuration work with ClinGen, both through variant curation expert panels and also through gene disease validity curations. From there, I applied to American Board of Medical Genetics and Genomics, Laboratory Genetics and Genomics Fellowships in several different places across the country, and ended up accepting a position at Duke University School of Medicine, where I did my LGG fellowship over the last 3 years from 2018 to about last December. And I currently am now a clinical molecular geneticist at the National Institutes of Health, where I focus on genome analysis in individuals that have primary immunodeficiencies, as well as individuals with developmental delay and intellectual disabilities and autism. And we're also moving into some other institutes here as well. So my day-to-day tasks with that is mainly looking for any variants that could potentially explain these phenotypes, confirming Sanger sequencing that's been done, and also signing out reports that go back to the patients.
Excellent, thank you. And finally, Annie.
Great. So my stepping stone opportunity was the same as Natalie's. After college, I worked for a couple years at NHGRI as a program analyst. Similar to her, I was primarily on ClinGen, but also helping with the ethical, legal, and social implications research group there. Again, mostly a coordinating role, but with great exposure to the kind of research and clinical aspects of the project. And from there, I went to medical school for those 4 years, and then went to residency. I am at Stanford University right now. I completed a pediatric intern year, and I'm now in my medical genetics residency. Not currently planning on any further education after this, just looking for a job once this ends in a year and a half.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. So those are our introductions. I think we're set up for a great discussion. I encourage everyone to add questions to the Q&A as you think of them. But because this is a clinical genomics career panel, for anyone who's interested in getting us started, I guess, has clinical genetics always been your goal, or how did you hear about that along the way?
I can start off. Clinical genetics was actually something I didn't know as much about, even though I did my PhD in the human genetics department at Baylor. I was mainly involved in mouse research there, particularly mouse embryonic stem cells. And so in coming to UNC and finishing up a postdoc after about a year, I was interested in kind of switching into something that was more bench to bedside focus, that would have more of an impact on clinical and patient care more directly in the immediate time frame rather than it being years down the line for drug development after molecular biology research had been done. So I knew Jonathan Berg actually from my time at Baylor because he did a short postdoc in a lab that was near mine where I was doing my PhD. And so I reached out to him about opportunities within his lab, and that's where I learned more about what the field of clinical genetics is and what it involves. So.
Thank you. Anyone want to add on to that? We can move on to the next. Okay, well, I will ask how, and I know some of you have mentioned several stepping stone opportunities, so speak to whichever one you would like, but how did you hear or learn about the opportunity that you eventually had as an opportunity for your own professional growth?
Yes, I can start. Oh.
Okay, Hannah and then Annie.
All right, sounds good. I actually interned with ClinGen, with the Broad ClinGen branch for 2 summers before starting my role as a full-time employee with the team. So I actually didn't know that it was kind of an opportunity, a pathway to take, kind of taking a few years off in between undergrad and further education. In the science field. So interning with the team and kind of experiencing so many different people from so many different backgrounds. And I realized that this was a pretty common step to take. And the immediate reaction I had was kind of relief, because it's really great to be working for 2 years while also figuring out what your next steps are. So yeah, that was how I learned about the stepping stone opportunity, as we're calling it. Mm-hmm.
And Annie?
Yeah, mine was just at kind of a typical job fair for college in my senior year. I went to college in California, but this job fair was in DC, and they just, had booths everywhere. And so I just went up to learn more about it. I had spent my summers in college with a group that was funded by the LC branch at NHGRI, so it was all very familiar to me, and I was excited to actually see them at the fair and pursue
it. Any other comments there?
I can add, I would say in general, I have found a lot on like search places like Indeed, with the caveat that sometimes advisors or people I worked with kind of pointed me towards a position that was posted there that they had heard about.
Okay, great advice there. And for our next question, what, for those of you who are in the role, what's something you really enjoy about your stepping stone opportunity? And for those who have kind of moved beyond, what was a highlight of your stepping stone opportunity? Natalie, would you like to start? Make sure everyone gets a chance to speak.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm stuck on the highlight because I think so many things about the position was great and was exactly what I needed. So I'll speak from the position of medical school specifically. What I thought was a big asset to my application was just the variety of experiences I was able to get. So I was doing administrative work, I was doing teamwork, and so that required a lot of communication, professionalism skills, a little bit of kind of customer service in a way when I was communicating with grantees. And so all those things were things that I could highlight in my interviews or in my medical school applications. I think another great thing was just gaining a very detailed understanding of all these cutting edge genetic technologies. Oftentimes I was talking to researchers, like people who had spent years studying science, but they were in their very specific niche. And so I would be able to raise something to them that they didn't know about. And I maybe had a relatively shallow understanding of, but it was shallow but broad. And that's something that I really liked about my position at the NIH and the NHGRI.
Excellent. Other perspectives?
One of the big highlights for me was just being able to work with so many different people from so many different institutions within ClinGen. I got to meet a variety of individuals from all different backgrounds and different career paths. And so I was able to get a really good understanding of just how far clinical genetics can actually reach in terms of what people end up doing in their careers. And that was a big deal for me because when I went into my postdoc originally, I just kind of had an open mind, not knowing exactly what I wanted to do at the end of it.
And a question about that point, I think that many people face when they are finishing undergrad and it feels like many people have their educational plan set. They know where they're applying. And for those that that didn't go directly into a graduate program, which it sounds like all of our panelists started with an opportunity, was that a big crossroads for you? Were you initially planning to go into a graduate program, or how did you navigate that choice?
So I'll just jump in quickly and say that I didn't know, super well that I wanted to do medicine at first. And so this was my way of getting a job in the field, being exposed to a lot of different careers. So I worked with physicians, genetic counselors, PhDs, just people with a lot of different backgrounds. And that exposure helped me say, okay, I like what this person does, but I don't like what that other person does. And so it helped me solidify that medicine was the role that I wanted to play in this bigger field. And, if I had gone straight into medical school after undergrad, I don't know if I would have had that clarity or that certainty that this was what I wanted to do.
Great point. Others have anything to add there?
I would agree and echo that. I would also say that while I was trying to figure out which program I wanted to go to, I was also gaining the experience and taking the time to really build up myself and my CV before applying. So it felt like a good time to do that.
Great. So we do have a question from the audience. This is someone who has who themselves has a PhD in biochemistry, has been doing nutritional counseling for about 3 years. But it sounds like broadly for someone who has a PhD background, the person is asking how can you pursue more opportunities within the hospital setting? So if I'm reading this, making that move from more of a research standpoint to more of a clinically focused career. Does anyone have any advice on that transition? What a good stepping stone opportunity might be in that case?
This is Erin. One idea that came into my head when I saw that is just thinking, especially with the focus on nutritional intervention, and if you are interested in genetics, specifically working in a metabolic clinic, the children that are diagnosed with metabolic diseases from newborn screening often rely heavily on nutritionists to help them with their diet and maintaining, appropriate levels of whatever they need to maintain. So that might be a consideration. Maybe trying to find a clinic like that to observe in or volunteer in could be something of interest.
I would just echo what Erin said. I was going to say essentially the same thing, but I didn't exactly know what formal stepping stone opportunities exist for that. But I interact daily with nutritionists for our metabolic patients. All of their labs, they're being reviewed by the nutritionist as well. They're recommending changes in the formula. They're communicating with families. So it's definitely clinically oriented. And with such a strong research and science background, I think that kind of role would be something that you would be greatly prepared for. So I think it's more of a matter of trying to find a particular metabolic or clinical group that is either close to you or in a location that you'd be interested in, and then trying to make some initial introductions to the metabolic nutritionist there.
Or even, depending on what state you're in, contacting the state laboratory that does your newborn screening and try to figure out which clinic they refer people to, if there are several, and where they're located and things like that. So that might be a good place to start if you don't immediately know the clinic.
Excellent. Great idea. This is our pop-up genetic counselor, Erin Riggs, who has also had a a number of opportunities within clinical genetics along the way.
Hi, sorry.
Thank you, Erin. Sorry. Bonus appearance. Okay. And another question, because we're specifically calling these stepping stone opportunities, certainly there are people who pursue careers at the level we're talking about in different ways and not go on to school or another opportunity. So when you think about timing, how did you know when it was time to move on, or how did you come up with your own personal timeline towards achieving your career goals? And that can still be evolving.
I think that one thing to consider is the length of the training process itself. So you have to make sure you're in a good place where you're confident going into it, that this is the right path for you, but you also have to balance that training in various fields, PhD, medical school, whatever you pursue is lengthy in of itself. And so just trying to balance that you want to still finish at a reasonable time, but have the experience prior. So I think that's kind of a personal question that everyone's going to have a slightly different answer to, and just getting to that level of confidence that this is the right field, but that then you're ready to start it, which can take anywhere from 0 years right after undergraduate to 10 years. We had people in our medical school class who had multiple different careers prior to med school.
Others want to weigh in on the timing and how they're approaching that question? I think that's one consideration. We offer a lot of opportunities as temporary or transitional, but I would say for anyone who does find themselves in an opportunity that they enjoy, and maybe you can also always talk to people at your institution who have been in that position or something similar for a while and see what opportunities for career growth there are there. It may change the perspective on where you thought that stepping stone opportunity was taking you. Erin, anything else to add there? Your photo has popped up.
No, but I will answer the question in the Q&A if you want to ask it.
Excellent. Yes. So we had a question come in. Can a genetic counselor play the role of principal investigator and lead a clinical trial, or are such positions only reserved for physicians? So we'll have Erin as our genetic counseling representative. We have Annie as a physician and Bryce as a PhD scientist. So let's hear everyone's take.
Yes. So as Danielle mentioned, I'm not officially a part of this panel, but I'm just hanging out here to answer any questions that might be relevant for me. So I am a genetic counselor, and I am actually a principal investigator of the ClinGen project. So it is certainly possible for genetic counselors to reach the PI level. It is difficult though, and this is not something that is available everywhere. So you have to make sure that you are with an institution that will allow people without PhDs or MDs to serve as principal investigators. But I think that's changing over time, and more places are getting on board with that, because the master's in genetic counseling is the terminal degree at this point in time for the genetic counseling profession. But if that is something that you're interested in, I would, reach out to other counselors involved in research, see where they are, which institutions they are with, and maybe think about pursuing careers with those institutions. I have in my past life also been involved in clinical trials, not as the PI. I would say for those, I'm not sure, maybe Annie or Bryce know better. I don't know of any genetic counselors that have been PIs of clinical trials, but we have been heavily involved, particularly in the lysosomal storage disease space. So that's a very specific type of genetic disorder that does have clinical treatment. And so obviously there were trials involved to make sure that those medications, their enzyme replacement therapies, are safe and effective. And we were very, very heavily involved in that process. And I'll stop there and see if Annie or Bryce want to add anything else.
I don't have much to add. I would agree with that's my impression as well, but defer to Erin on her expertise here.
I would agree with Erin as well. And I can kind of speak to two different facets from my own experience here at the NIH, even though I've only been here since about February of this year. So the clinical sequencing program that I'm involved in at the NIH that does clinical genomic sequencing for individuals with primary immunodeficiencies, for instance, that project is actually led or co-led by a genetic counselor here at the NIH. I'd have to talk to her more about in terms of her background and how she got into it, but she is literally co-leading it as one of the main PIs on the project. I've also seen in the past, and from the question that you're asking, I imagine you're discussing clinical trials related to treatment of patients. I have seen clinical trials sometimes on the NIH reporter website for grants that people have, where genetic sequencing itself was part of an actual clinical trial to understand how that testing methodology could be used within patients, even though it's not necessarily a medicine itself. From a PhD aspect, as a PhD scientist, I'm actually seeing more and more that there are PhD scientists out there that are getting involved in the kind of computational research realm of clinical genomics within patients, but they often have collaborations with medical doctors that will refer patients into their sequencing programs or sequencing initiatives. And I had regular interactions with some of these while I was within ClinGen, actually, where they just had a PhD and they were actually doing, they were PIs of projects that were focused on clinical genetics.
Excellent. Thank you all for your perspectives there. And we have another question from the audience. So this is from someone who's asking, as an undergraduate or coming out of undergrad, how can we make ourselves competitive to gain these stepping stone opportunities? I have often seen that it can be really hard to gain a clinical intern position. So wondering if our panelists have any insight on being competitive for some of these roles. Whether that was how you prepared or after your time in that role, how you feel you think a candidate could prepare.
Yeah, I was actually involved in the hiring process for someone, in my position as a biocurator for ClinGen this past cycle. So what we were really looking for, or what we really appreciated seeing in a resume, is some amount of research experience in undergrad. And I think with the caveat there is that we weren't looking for like a super highly specific or relevant research experience. It was just very, impressive to see some amount of research in undergrad. So I would say, don't be afraid, email that professor, that mentor, go chat with your professor during office hours to try to get a research opportunity going in undergrad. I know it's kind of easier said than done, but really take any opportunity that you possibly can to try and load some research in your undergrad experience as well.
Great, thank you, Hannah.
And I'll just add, as someone, again, who hires into genetic counseling assistant positions specifically, we get a lot of applications for these positions, more and more each time we open them up, just because I think that it is becoming more difficult to get into genetic counseling programs without some kind of experience as a genetic counseling assistant or one of these other stepping stone opportunities. It's becoming more and more difficult to go straight from undergrad into genetic counseling school. And when I look at these applications, I mean, honestly, they all look very similar on paper. And, when I'm looking at the paper resumes to kind of weed out like the first round, I'm definitely looking, as Hannah said, that you have you've demonstrated some kind of interest in this field. You've put yourself out there, you try to get some additional experience, realizing that, I know you're an undergrad. I remember being an undergrad. I know the limitations there and things like that. We're not looking at, you've done a elaborate research project or anything like that. But another thing that I look for on the paper resumes is to make sure you've spelled everything correctly. You proofread your resume. You did not send me a resume that you haven't updated in 2 years. A cover letter is always nice. I think that showing that extra initiative, especially when so many people look the same on paper, have very similar qualifications, kind of sets you out apart from others and makes me want to call you for a phone interview. And then when I call you for a phone interview, what I'm looking for really is personality, just someone that I think I can get along with, that I think that I can help, that will be a good fit for my team. So just really, if you do get a phone interview for one of these opportunities, just be yourself and just be natural. And it's really about finding a mentor, a person that you think that you can click with, because if you just take any old opportunity with someone that you don't like or you don't enjoy working with, it's not going to be as beneficial for you.
And thinking about that, just as you mentioned, mentors, for those that have gone on through several opportunities now, what did you find most valuable in a mentor? And are there mentors you've stayed in touch with beyond the time in your stepping stone opportunity? Anyone there? Annie, can I put you on the spot there? I know you've had several opportunities along the way.
I'm sorry, did you call on me or Annie?
Oh, I said Annie, but if anyone wants to speak up.
Yeah, I think finding a mentor is kind of the biggest thing in terms of getting more growth opportunities for yourself, and then trying to figure out kind of next steps forward for you. And I would add to whoever asked this question that I don't think you're alone in feeling like it's competitive to find a job right after undergraduate. I was nervous about finding a job. I was nervous about applying to medical school. I was nervous about applying to residency. It's hard all along the way, and the stress and anxiety doesn't go away, but you just try to find the job and opportunity that's the best fit for you, and then keep adjusting from there. I think in terms of finding people that can mentor you, it's really rare to find terrific mentors, but when you have them, it really changes everything. And you want to find someone who understands where your kind of knowledge level and what your role is, and then tries to work based off that. So we're all relatively young on this call and don't have a lot of experience. And I think good mentors acknowledge that, but aren't going to exclude you from projects just because of that. They're going to try to harness what few skills you do have at that point in your training, to get you to have more skills, and to kind of challenge you to take on additional opportunities and growth points. So in my opinion, if you have a good mentor, then I would cling on to them, try to make opportunities that maybe didn't exist, but if you have someone you really like working with, and trying to figure out a way around the system where you can go back and work with them another summer, or you can continue to stay in touch with them throughout medical school. I still keep in touch with Erin and Danielle a little bit, even though it's been, 6 years since I formally worked with them. So just hang on to those good connections when you have them.
But I think that's a really good point. So to be honest, like Danielle and I love Annie, and it's been, like you said, 6 years since you last worked with us. But anytime something like this comes up, that we still think of her, we still call her up, and when you're ready to look for jobs in the genetics field, you can leverage your connections with us. I will recommend you to anyone. If I know somebody where you want to get a job, I will put in a word for you. But it's like that. You don't have to have a super formal relationship, but it's just the connections that you make in each stepping stone opportunity, like Annie said, just kind of, if they were good connections, cling to them, because they might help you out later on down the road in ways that you don't expect initially.
Great, thank you all for that. And thinking about things we've talked about, it sounds like, most often stepping stone opportunities are used as a way to reassure yourself about a path that you think you'd like to go down. Did anyone have kind of an about face experience while they were in their stepping stone opportunity where maybe something they'd held on to a while that they thought is a path they'd pursue, they changed track, or just kind of a revelation along the way? Doesn't need to be a huge revelation, any kind of new information that changed your mind.
I have a small one.
Yes.
So as I mentioned, I did academic research in undergrad and then continued that a little bit after. Then I moved on to clinical testing. While I was in clinical testing, I thought, oh, I should go back to research. This is where I should be. This is for me. So I took a very short position back in more of an academic research setting and very quickly realized that that was not for me, and it was not something I felt like I really was striving at anymore, particularly with animal research. It just wasn't right for me anymore, and that didn't mean it was a bad career path, but I think it's also good to recognize when something is not for you.
And I'm gonna hop in on this one. I'm Molly. I'm a genetic counseling assistant at Geisinger like Leanna. And I originally wanted to go to genetic counseling programs, applied, did not get in due to lack of experience, so entered this position, and actually through working with genetic counselors and physicians, actually totally changed career paths, and I'm currently applying to medical school. So I think take all the opportunities and do all the things that you think you're interested in, but also don't feel like you have to follow the path that you have planned for yourself just because that's what you've decided and that's what you're working towards. It's totally okay to switch things up whenever you decide that something is different. It's better to have not spent those extra years doing something else than spend your whole life doing something that you don't find as fulfilling as a different career.
I have a friend who was also in the program analyst position. I think he had majored in biology, was thinking he wanted to get a PhD when he came into the job. And he actually became really interested in making figures for data that we had. And he ended up in the communications branch of the NIH doing data analysis and creating figures. I think he's getting his data analysis and presentation master's online now. So I think, you know, find, even if, for example, like I was in a genetics position, if I was really interested in the design elements, like maybe I would have reached out to Scott Goringer, who does the website. Like there's always a niche at the intersection of your interests that you can explore, and don't be ashamed or afraid that you're at a genetics institute and you're actually really interested in the design elements of what's going on around you. So I would encourage people to just explore whatever your interests are, and then hopefully that helps you find something that you're more passionate about.
That's a great takeaway. I think one bonus of any opportunity you have is you're not just going to be experiencing the job that you applied for, but all the people working around you in many different roles. And most people really enjoy talking about what they're doing and what they love doing if they are lucky enough to be passionate about their career. So I like that advice, Natalie. You know, reach out to someone and just say, how did you get here? The conversation we're having today, I think people more often than not like having that conversation over coffee or Zoom or something like that. Any other surprises along the way in your stepping stone opportunities that may have led to something you weren't initially planning to pursue? Bryce.
I was just going to say, when I originally started out in my PhD at Baylor, I thought I was going to go the full track of benchside research and become a PI, just doing animal models for the rest of my life, and writing grants and publishing papers at the bench research. It wasn't until I moved into this new postdoc, and then as a biocurator within ClinGen, that I realized there was a whole other side of things where I could take the skills I learned in my PhD and apply them to something with a more direct clinical aspect. So that was a huge about face for me of, well, I'm not going to be a PI anymore that writes grants. I'm going to move into the clinical laboratory realm and help with testing and interpreting of tests for patients. So.
Great, thank you. And new question that came in, what if you really like your stepping stone job and do not want to continue on to a higher career?
I'll take this one.
All right, Annie, go for it.
I really liked my job after college and had a hard time thinking about leaving. And I was not a science major in college and just knew medical school was probably not going to be necessarily my favorite time in life. And so I struggled with how to balance how much time do I spend in a role that I really enjoy, but has a ceiling. And there really are kind of limits to growth in certain types of roles. And you can try to navigate around that a little bit. But just to be blunt, I think that there are limits in growth in certain types of roles, and that certain professions really do require an advanced degree. Others don't. And we kind of touched on that a little bit with talking about genetic counseling and opportunities to be a head PI. And certainly those type of growth opportunities exist. They're just more rare. And then for someone who is right out of college that doesn't have any type of master's degree, the opportunities for you to take a leadership position are going to be kind of few and far between without significant years of experience and great roles on projects. So I think it's kind of taking a look on, okay, what do you like about that role? And can you get back to it, but with more experience? So that way you can keep ensuring that the aspects you like about that role are still in your day-to-day life as a full career, as opposed to just trying to buy more time between things. And then it's also a really good position to be in, to like your job so much that you're having a hard time leaving. That's a good thing to have. So just trying to focus on, well, how do I ensure that I have all these things I like in the long term? And that may or may not mean leaving to get further education, so you can come back and essentially be able to continue that role, but in a greater capacity.
And I'll say it depends, of course, on the role you're in and the institution you're in. But I think many, if you're fortunate enough to have a mentor or even your HR department, you can ask about opportunities for growth. Maybe if you're a study coordinator who thought they'd go on to medical school, but you find you really like project management type roles, is there a certification you can get? Or is there a change in your job you can make at that institution to begin to grow in the type of work that you're doing? So it could be very institution dependent, but I think the answer we've heard for every question is don't hesitate to ask someone about it, what you would need to do to go beyond it, or to make a career out of what you've started. Because sometimes, depending on the institution, just having years of experience at one place really does help you open up new opportunities. So, Erin, when Erin pops up, I'm gonna turn to you. Anything to add there?
I just wanted to add, I think, between you and I, the stepping stone opportunities that we offer, so the genetic counseling assistants at Geisinger and the biocurators at the Broad, there's no timeline, there's no time limit to that. You can stay with us as long as you like. It's not like it's a 1-year position and then you have to leave. So, if after a year you don't yet feel comfortable to move on to the next step, that's completely fine with us. We love to keep people on for longer if they prefer to stay with us for longer. So just want to throw that out there, that a lot of these stepping stone opportunities, you could stay for an extended amount of time, but most people, just like as Annie said, choose to move on because they want to either advance in salary or in leadership opportunities, or a combination of the two, or things.
And it may be for someone who's used to working with people who are often spending a year or two and going on to school, your manager may not think to make that clear. So to bring it up and say, at your annual review or even in your interview, what are opportunities for growth here? I think those are all valid questions to ask, certainly. Other thoughts on that? We did get a question from the audience that has been upvoted. It's specifically about genetic counseling pay scales. And I don't think we have any genetic counselors on the panel specifically, but oh, look, we do now. So Erin,
besides me and you.
Yes, well, okay. So, and therefore we will step in, emergency genetic counselors. The question just asked about the pay scale that NSGC, the National Society of Genetic Counseling, reports, and how does this change with year of experience, and does it plateau at a certain point? I honestly think this question can probably apply to many of the career paths we're about to talk about. So I'll turn that over to Erin, but this is probably broadly applicable. So feel free
Yeah.
for others to
I
weigh
mean,
in.
I would say the salary does vary within the US state by state for sure, like depending on what the cost of living is for the particular state or city where you are looking to work. Obviously, genetic counselors in those higher cost of living areas have on paper a higher salary than people living in lower cost of living areas. Salaries do increase with experience. And if you work in an academic institution or really any kind of institution where there are many counselors, there's often a very specific career ladder. Say like you start at GC1 and the salary range is this to this. And then after X years of experience, you move to GC2. This to this is very calculated, very much determined by HR, and there's not a lot of wiggle room between the ranges that they set forth. I would probably say that there probably is a plateau within the clinical space. Would you agree to that, Danielle? Like counselors who see patients in a hospital setting, like they reach that highest tier and then that's pretty much it, unless they take a different direction, like try to be the program manager or move to research like we have done. That's a different kind of pay scale. Or move into it like an industry job or something like that. Those will have different pay scales than your academic clinical settings. So it depends on your geographical location, what type of setting you're working in, plus your years of experience.
And I think as demand grows for any of these clinical genetics jobs, just as testing continues to increase, we have more information to interpret, more patients to return that information to. Just the scarcity of professionals and some of who are eligible for some of these careers, I think in the past few years has just driven up what that base salary is in some cases. So certainly in the field, I think we've seen genetic counseling specifically some increases just based on demand, really. Okay, we're nearing the end of our time. I will ask a relatively cheesy question, but any lessons learned or takeaways, what's something that you carry with you in your current opportunity or that you've just carried along with you from your stepping stone opportunity or from an earlier opportunity that's really served you well?
I would say don't be afraid to email someone that you may not even know, but you're interested in getting in contact with to learn more about opportunities. When I was applying for laboratory genetics and genomics fellowships, I remember writing one of the directors or the training director of one of the fellowships at an institution, and it led to a meeting at a conference and ultimately me getting an interview after putting in my application. And this person didn't know who I was working with, didn't really know me from anyone, but sometimes it can be surprising the people you do end up writing when they write back and how it can help.
Good to hear.
I think I also want to
If I
echo.
see someone go off mute, I go for them.
I think I also want to echo the don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Also, don't be afraid to make mistakes. We're all in these stepping stone positions. We are or were, young professionals. So I think it's important that it's probably going to happen regardless, making some mistakes. That's okay. I think what's most important is how you address and then use those as learning experiences in the future. I've learned a lot from my mistakes just in my life in general, but also there's so much to learn in these stepping stone positions. So just embrace it and put yourself out there. Don't be afraid of anything that could happen. Everyone understands.
And I've had the pleasure, I think, of working with everyone on this panel. And I'll just say, I know we think of these as opportunities for the person in the role to learn, but you can also have a huge impact on some projects. I think, you've all done great work on the project that brought us together, ClinGen. So really, you may just think of it as a time in your life, but for those that stay with the project, I think even some of these roles that we consider short-term, you can really do a lot of good work along the way. And we learn from individuals in the stepping stone opportunities all the time. So
absolutely. And I would totally echo that. Like if any of you think you ever played a small role in ClinGen ClinGen. Just know that, and Danielle and I appreciate everything that you do wholeheartedly. You help us out. You've moved the project forward, and we couldn't do this project without you and any of the other people we have on the team that are in Stepping Stone Opportunities. So we very much appreciate the time that you've given us.
We have a late breaking audience question. Do you see genetic counselors? We have a lot of genetic counselor interest today. I will also say there's a genetic counseling panel you can go back and watch the recording of. But in roles of biostat analyst and bioinformatics, are employers open to hiring them directly after grad school? So as a genetic counselor, I'll just speak to that's not specific training we get in genetic counseling school, but that people are coming into genetic counseling school with all sorts of backgrounds. So certainly depending on the specific role, you may have qualifications. But if you are interested in pursuing a biostat analyst role or bioinformatics, there could also be other training programs that would get you closer to that role. I mean, there's so many. Computational genetics is just a field I really wasn't even familiar with until I started working in research more. And there's so many different types of training programs out there. So if you're interested in genetic counseling and want to make it fit, that you may potentially be able to do that, but there may be a different kind of program out there for you that you don't even know about that could really set you up.
Yeah, and I would add, I think like that particular combination of skill set is something that we'll see an interest in more and more and more. Like we would probably love somebody like that in ClinGen to work with us, somebody who has a good understanding of clinical genetics plus a good understanding of bioinformatics. I think that would be a very unique combination that will become increasingly high demand. I wish I knew more about bioinformatics.
Erin, if you find a stepping stone opportunity, you could be on our panel next year to tell us about it. Right. Any closing thoughts from our guests? I want to thank you all so much for your participation today. I hope the audience and our guests, thank you for joining. I hope you found this useful. Anything else you'd like to add in? No pressure.
If anyone is applying to medical school and has questions about the process, please email me. I'm going to put my email in the chat.
Wonderful. Thank you, Natalie. Great. Well, we appreciate all of your time today. I'm going to put up just to end with some closing slides. So bear with me while I remember how to share my screen. Okay. Oops. Here we are. The recording of today's panel will be posted on the ClinGen website. It's available at clinicalgenome.org careers. We have also a call out on our homepage and we'll also be tweeting about it. So if you aren't following us yet, you can get information about ClinGen at clinical genome or ClinGen resource on Twitter. And I will also encourage everyone to complete our post-series survey. So we're just launching this after our 5 weeks. We'll be contacting everyone who signed up with the form. But if you found this helpful, if you didn't find it helpful, all of that information is useful to us to help plan future events. So it's a short survey and I encourage all attendees to please take a look at that. We'd really appreciate your feedback. So we'll get that URL into the chat, but it will also be emailed out to you afterwards as well. And with that, I think we can end. So thank you all so much for your time. We really appreciate it.